Hello and welcome to StudyIQ. I am your friend Rahul Saigaonkar. I hope you are in good spirits today. Today we are going to have a very interesting discussion about the age of consent. Why are we discussing this? Recently, Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte has approved a bill which raises the sexual consent age from 12 years to 16 years. Now, in this particular discussion, first of all, we'll understand what is the meaning of age of consent for sexual acts. I'm quite sure you have a question. If Philippines has raised it from 12 to 16, what is the age in India? We'll understand why the Philippine leader has passed this particular amendment, why the age of consent has been increased in Philippines. Then we'll talk about international experience. What is the age of consent in India? What is the age of consent in other countries? That would be the agenda in this particular discussion. To get to know all that information, stay with me on StudyIQ. And if you're preparing for competitive exams like UPSC, Judiciary, RBI, State PSC, do visit our website studyIQ.com. You can also download our app from Google Play Store where you'll get all the information about us. And do not forget to use the code Rahul33 at the checkout. If you use this code RAHUL33, you will get 33% discount on any course on the StudyIQ platform. Right, with that note, let us begin our discussion. As I told you, recently, the Philippine leader, President Rodrigo Duterte, he has signed off on an amendment to the Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation and Discrimination Act, where the age of consent has been increased from 12 years to 16 years. In fact, activists were fighting for this change for years now. It is said that since last 90 years, the age of consent in Philippines is just 12 years. Now, I'm quite sure you have a question. So, what is this age of consent and why it has been increased from 12 to 16 in Philippines? What is the meaning of age of consent? Age of consent is a legal term. Age of consent is the age at which a person is considered legally competent to give consent to sexual acts, say sexual intercourse or any sexual activity. Now, simply put, I'm quite sure you are a little confused here. Simply put, it is the age at which an individual is considered mature enough, legally competent enough to indulge themselves in sexual activity. Now, this age is very important so that children are not sexually exploited. Now, let me just give you an example and let me try to explain it clearly. I told you that in Philippines, the age has been increased from 12 to 16, right? So the law has come and now the age of consent in Philippines is 16. Now imagine I am a Filipino, right? And tomorrow I engage in sexual activity with an individual from Philippines who is of age 15 years, right? And this would be a crime now. I indulge in sexual activity with a 15-year-old. That means it would be a statutory rape. No matter what this 15-year-old says, say, imagine the 15-year-old has given consent. She says that she has given consent. I say that she lied, that her age was 21 years old. She was 15, but she looked 21. And she said yes, she did not object. None of these things matter. It would be a statutory rape itself. Alright, so that is the meaning of age of consent. Age of consent is the minimum age at which a person is considered legally competent to say okay for sexual acts. Now, it all depends on the maturity level, the brain development, all these things are considered before setting the age of consent. I hope it is quite clear. And no kind of explanation works in the court of law. See, I told you, say tomorrow if this happens and I'm arrested and I say that this 15-year-old, she gave me consent, then she said that she was 21 years old, I was duped into agreeing to that age. Nothing of this matters because that age of consent is very important. It is considered as statutory rape. Statutory rape means where one or both people below the age of consent agree for sexual activity, and that sexual activity or sexual encounter would be considered as a rape if one of them is an adult, right? I hope it is clear what is the meaning of age of consent. Now, what has Philippines done? In the latest bill, President Rodrigo Duterte has announced that the age of consent would now be increased from 12 to 16. It would be a gender neutral bill. That means it applies to both males and females. Any adult engaging in any sort of sexual contact with anyone who's 16 years or under would now be considered a statutory rape. But here in the bill, there is a clause that if the age difference between them is 3 or less than 3, then it should have to be proved consensual. It should not be abusive or exploitative. right? The definition of non-abusive, non-exploitative has also been given in the bill. That means now a person in Philippines can indulge themselves in sexual activity within this particular age limit. Again, 13 would be minimal. Anything below the 13 would be considered as a statutory crime. Please remember, if a 13-year-old is indulging in sexual acts, then the upper age limit for the other person would be 16. That means the difference between these two should be only 3. I hope it is clear. Now, this particular clause where some relaxation is given for the age, say 3 years has been given here. Now, that is given for the benefit of adolescent. Many a times what happens, people when they enter into college, they're trying to explore themselves, they're trying to explore their bodies, right? So if adolescents are involved in sexual acts with consent, that has to be proved. It should not be abusive, it should not be exploitative, then it is allowed. So 13 to 19 would be allowed. Please remember, again, if a 13-year-old is involved, then the maximum age of other person has to be 60. Clear? So that is the rule that Philippines has brought. Another question, sir, why this change has come? Because, see, first of all, UNICEF, the United Nations body for welfare of children, it has highlighted that in Philippines the age of consent was just 12. It was mere 12. That means before this change, imagine any person, any adult who was indulging in sexual activity with, say, 13-year individual and say that they had given consent. They were not criminals. I hope you understand the gravity of the change. UNICEF had highlighted that for 90 years this law hadn't changed, and that is why they have changed it to 16 years. Apart from that, a study in 2015 has highlighted that many children between the age of 13 to 24 years, they had experienced some sort of sexual violence in their childhood. And very strangely, most of the sexual incident had happened from a very close person like the father, brother, stepmother, etc. And there were many males also. Male children have experienced or had experienced more of this particular sexual abuse or sexual exploitation from very close family members. Apart from this, a recent data by Save the Children Philippines organization, just in the 2 months between June to July 2020 during the lockdown, 16.2% respondents between the age of 10 to 17, they spoke about sexual abuse to them. Apart from that, it is well known Philippines has a documented history of cover-up, especially being a Catholic country. 80 to 85% of population is Catholic, and it has been highlighted in Philippines that over 200 priests out of 7,000 priests there in Philippines may have committed some sort of a crime of some sort of sexual impropriety. And many a times child abuse is one of the big examples in the Catholic Church institutions. And this is not just true for Philippines. We have seen evidences of sexual impropriety from the clergy in many countries, right? In many countries like France, in the many European countries, we have seen these documented evidences. Now, for all these reasons, Philippines has now changed the age of consent from 12 years to 16 years. All right. What is the international experience and what is the age of consent in India? Let's first talk about Philippines. See, the Philippines law that has been brought right now, it is in line with the Romeo and Juliet laws which are enforced in many countries. Now, mainly for consensual sex between adolescents. I told you now in Philippines, sexual activity would be allowed between 13 to 19 provided there is only a difference of 3 years. I hope it is clear now. The age of consent is 16 but 3 years relaxable. Now, these kind of changes have been brought mainly for consensual sex among adolescents. For instance, in Ohio in United States, despite the age of consent being 16, consensual sex between those aged 13 or older partner aged below 18 is considered legal. That means in Ohio, 5 years age relaxation is available. Same applies for France. In France, the age of consent is 15, but consensual sex is allowed between a minor and a partner up to 5 years older. That means, see, if there is consensual sex between 15-year-old individual and 20-year-old individual, it would be legal provided it is consensual and non-abusive and non-exploitative. Clear? So these kind of things have been brought, Romeo and Juliet laws. But if we talk about India, there is a clear-cut line. 18 years is the age of consent according to the POCSO Act, Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. That is the age of consent. In India, there is no kind of relaxation, etc. But 18 years would be considered the age of consent. In fact, majority of the countries around the world, they have 18 years as age of consent. But there are variances. Some countries are on the lower threshold. There are some countries who have gone towards a higher threshold. For example, the age of consent is lowest in Angola, the African country, where it is only 12 years. Angola was joined by Philippines before, but now Philippines has moved from 12 to 16 years. Apart from that, Japan, Burkina Faso, Comoros and Niger have age of consent at 13 years only. Countries like China, Germany, Italy, Brazil, they have it at 14. That means if any person indulges themselves, if any adult indulges themselves in sexual activity with any person below the age of 14, it would be a crime. It would be a statutory rape. No comments, right? In United States, it varies because we know United States is a federation. States have higher powers. Different states have different age of consent. It varies from 16 to 18. In UK, it is 16. In France, it is 15. One of the highest age of consent is in Bahrain. It is 21. South Korea has a higher age of consent, that is 20 years. That means in South Korea, if any person indulges in sexual activity below age of 20, right? If any adult indulges in sexual activity with a person below 20, that would be a crime. So this is the international experience. Please remember, in India, the age of consent is 18. Right. With that note, let me end my discussion here. Thank you for watching this video. Jai Hind.